Hey internets, so today's video is going to be another refuting breadtube, one of those gamer rants, which I am specifically going to focus on the distinction between positive and negative liberty using a clip featuring Vaush as an example. However, more other breadtubers and leftists have made this argument besides Vaush, so it's not really just about him, but rather this is more of an educational video about positive and negative liberty and why the whole positive liberty concept is basically a grift. As I will be explaining, it's not real liberty because it's not actually sustainable. And it's also sometimes called negative or positive freedom. And this concept is based on a theory put forth by Isaiah Berlin, and it goes something like this. Negative liberty is the freedom from coercion, or in other words, it's the freedom from coercive interference in your daily life, while positive is more like the freedom of access to do whatever you want. And this can sometimes be a bit confusing, so I'll use a simple explanation using bread as an example. So for the example for negative liberty, imagine a baker who wants to bake some bread. And negative liberty and negative freedom would be that the baker is free to use his tools and ingredients to bake his bread how he wants to, without some external authority coming along and locking him up in jail or whatever, because his bread was not being baked in accordance to bread regulation number CUK 88490A section 17 on page 2465A of the Code of Screw You. Basically, he can make his bread how he wants and he doesn't have to worry from external coercion stopping him for basically no reason. In practice, the policies that favor negative freedom are generally free market policies. The idea that you should be free to trade and engage in other voluntary acts of economic exchange and development without external aggressive forces telling you otherwise. But what about positive liberty? So for positive liberty, I'll use another example using, again, bread. Imagine a hungry guy who wants to eat a loaf of bread. However, the bread he wants is being sold in a store for $5, but he only has $2. So sad. Therefore, he does not have the freedom to gain access to the bread he wants because market forces are standing in the way of his desires. In practice, positive liberty is generally represented by social welfare systems, or just general socialist ideas. For example, say the society this guy lives in decides to give everyone $200 of food credits every month. Said hungry guy is now able to buy the bread, assuming he doesn't blow his credits on something stupid beforehand. Now, the socialist argument in favor of positive liberty over negative liberty given by Vaush is pretty short, so I'll just clip it here.
Is freedom. That's what I care about most, and that's what libertarian socialism is about. There are many types of freedoms, positive and negative. If I might indulge very briefly, like, is a man thrown to a lawless desert without food, water, or clothing free? I'm really asking.
So, probably no.
I agree. He's free to die.
But that's an extreme example,
Sure.
not applicable in modern wealthy America.
No,
or
but-
any Western nation.
But it's a philosophical base.
it's also a Rousseauian argument. Man's born free and he, spends the rest of his life in chains. It's
Right.
just anti-commercial in nature.
Well, no, but it's a base philosophical argument because it's true. They're lawless. There's nothing preventing him from doing anything in that environment, but he has no ability to act.
Now, there are a lot of issues with this positive freedom cell, but for the sake of this video, I'm just going to focus on 3 of them. One of these is something that people who are familiar with the justifications for free market policies might already be aware of, and the other problems are a bit more obscure, and I haven't really seen too many people go into detail for, which is basically why I'm making this video. And anyways, I'll start with the first refutation, which is kind of an obvious answer to a lot of people who've studied these already kind of know about, which is that positive liberty is really just theft, and that the way it works necessitates theft from other people. So an alternative but equally uncharitable hypothetical to Vaush's man in the desert who's dying because he doesn't have anything but is technically free from any laws would be to instead imagine a street robber. He goes up to people, sticks a revolver in their face, takes their money, and then lives large however he wants with access to whatever he wants, assuming he never gets caught. Like the man crawling through a desert without food or water is an absurdist analogy on negative freedom, this is basically an absurdist analogy on positive freedom. But it does prove a fairly simple point, or like Vaush said, provides a based philosophical argument, which is that positive freedom, while it technically provides the people enjoying that positive liberty more choices in life to pursue their goals, it generally necessitates interfering in the negative liberty of others. And that's a very big problem because it doesn't actually have to be this way. So for instance, going back to the hungry man buying bread with government food credits, this may at first seem better than the robber scenario, but not by much. If the state is taxing the store owner in order to pay for these food credits, and the store owner doesn't want to pay those taxes, well then the theft of his $5 loaf of bread is still occurring, it's just occurring in a way that is much more indirect. It's just A stealing from C and then giving to B, instead of it being directly stolen from C to B. And this is all kind of the general argument against positive freedom that most economists are already pretty familiar with. The true main difference between the two is that negative liberty is just, I want it, so let me do the work to build it, free from interference. And positive liberty is, I want it, so it gives me that for free. Often with various forms of social inequality being presented as justification for giving that for free. Which means that in many ways, the negative versus positive freedom argument is just the free market capitalism versus socialism question, again, just being taken from a slightly different angle. And thus a lot of the arguments against it are very similar to the arguments between capitalism and socialism. For instance, free market policies generally lead to people being wealthier overall anyways. And so if you're given the choice between everyone being equally poor, or some people having more than others but everyone being better off, then the latter is obviously the better choice. With the only real reason that you would want to ever really choose the former, and you would actually prefer everyone be poorer and worse off but equal, is pretty much just out of spite. Which is pretty lame, to be honest. However, the leftists do have somewhat of a point, which is that it's good for some kind of social safety net to exist so that people don't get put into a situation where they would have to potentially steal to survive. For instance, say that the hungry guy has $0 as opposed to $2 and he can't afford any bread at all. That could put someone in a situation where they have to steal to survive, period. And history has shown us that when given the choice of ethics versus dying, most people will choose to throw away ethics and just not die. Obviously that is not ethical, but it doesn't matter, that's just how human beings are. And we unfortunately just have to accept the reality of that. Fortunately, however, this distinction that negative liberty between positive liberty would have no kind of social safety net and that you therefore need positive liberty is actually a false dichotomy. Going back to the store owner who owns that bread, him being taxed in order to pay for those food credits is again only really a problem because he doesn't want to pay those taxes to pay for it. But what if enough people living in this city where this store exists actually do believe that there should be social safety nets, and they're willing to actually pay into it? Well, that's where you get things like mutual aid societies and fraternal benefit orders, where people actually can create a private and voluntary social safety net. Said hungry man could then join that mutual aid network, and they would help him during his time of need. Usually in exchange for the fact that once he gets back on his feet, he can then help others when they're down, who are also a part of the same mutual aid network. This is admittedly a very big oversimplification. If anyone's interested to hear how this would actually work, I recommend watching my previous video on the subject of fraternal aid societies. The TLDR of it is that they existed in the past and they don't really exist today because A, we have government-sponsored social safety nets now that kind of ended up replacing them, as well as various regulations were passed that interfered with them. So of course, in order for these societies to come back, we would need to remove those regulations. The main point I am making here is that a society doesn't actually need to focus on positive liberty in order to have the social benefits of positive liberty. That may seem counterintuitive to some people, but the reality is that this has been tried before in the past and it actually did work. In fact, for certain things like healthcare and whatnot, it worked arguably better than the current corporatist healthcare system that America has today, at the very least being far less expensive. In fact, that's a general issue with a lot of these government programs. They tend to be around 1/3 less or so efficient in terms of cost and output as private programs, and this definitely includes private charity and mutual aid networks. And so that would be the second refutation to the negative versus positive liberty argument. A lot of people don't know that you actually can have a voluntary welfare system, and it actually has been tried in the past, and that it's actually very efficient to do it this way. Plus, it gets rid of the ethical problem at the beginning, going back to the baker and his bread, or the store owner and his bread. With fraternal benefit orders put in place, the state no longer needs to steal from the store owner in order to pay for those food credits. And this is largely what I meant by this meme I posted on X earlier. Positive freedom, when unmasked, is really just revealing itself to be slavery, just like the plantation owners had. Yes, in fact, plantation owners unironically had a lot of positive freedom from the wealth that they gained from slavery. With, of course, the problems that it was both unethical and damaging to the rest of the economy. But, yeah, they had a lot of positive freedom. And this is something a lot of people who keep presenting positive freedom as a good thing don't really seem to understand. The idea of being entitled to somebody else's labor as a basis of economic rights, like Tony Annette here is saying, is really just thinly veiled slavery. If you think that you are entitled to somebody else being forced to do work in order to pay for your livelihood, then yeah, that's pretty much the definition of slavery there. Which brings me to the third and final refutation of positive liberty, which I will now take a look at the example Vaush gave a bit more directly here. So, a man stuck in the desert indeed has a lot of negative freedom. But let's take a step backwards for a second and ask ourselves, what, from a historical context very specifically, does this hypothetical situation that Vaush gave sound like? Well, that sounds a lot like mankind before we invented modern civilization, doesn't it? When man first stepped on this earth, we had nothing. We were in the wilderness and had absolutely nothing, but we did have freedom. And from that, we built everything we had, from cavemen to communal societies to more advanced civilizations like the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, all eventually bringing us to what we have today. But what if we didn't have that? What if we were to go back in time and push this idea of positive liberty and equality to its logical conclusion? But of course, not from the perspective of our modern technologically advanced society we have today, oh no. Instead, let's go back in time. What if humans had no negative liberty during our hunter-gatherer days? Say some advanced aliens came to Earth all the way from Andromeda and said, okay guys, we are going to permanently implement communism now for your own good. You are only allowed to keep eating the berries off the plants, you are only allowed to hunt X animals a day, you must share all the spoils equally, and you aren't allowed to do anything else without our approval. But hey, on the bright side, in case the humans ever had a bad day and they couldn't find anything or couldn't hunt anything or really couldn't get anything, the aliens would help bail them out, so thus guaranteeing that they would survive, which might seem like a great deal to the people living back then, but looking back on it today, this is obviously a terrible deal. Assuming these aliens deemed us unworthy of them sharing their technology with us, and were only interested in acting as an aggressive enforcement for permanent prehistoric communism, we would still be stuck at the same level of development today, all in exchange for more positive freedom and basically being livestock. And that admittedly is kind of a silly hypothetical, but the point is this: negative liberty creates wealth, while positive liberty does not. Positive freedom is just wanting to reap a harvest that you did not actually sow, regardless of what the creator of that harvest wants. So a focus on positive freedom gives no incentive for a society to advance. Negative liberty is specifically what allowed for that massive spike in advancement that allowed human society to become what it is today, so that we can now enjoy all these modern advancements that we have, because we were free to build them. Take that freedom away and take those incentives away, and human beings no longer have an incentive to go further. And that's the main issue with this grift here. Negative liberty creates the wealth and freedom that is being associated with positive liberty, while a focus on positive liberty actually destroys negative liberty when taken to its logical conclusion. So really, realistically, positive freedom is just wealth. It's the benefits you get from having wealth and having an advanced society that created that wealth. An advanced society that exists because of negative freedom. And so while Vaush's rhetoric is very good, all he's really doing is saying that we should be allowed to enjoy the wealth without really understanding where that wealth comes from. It's kind of like wanting to plug a power strip into itself for infinite power. Sure, that'd be awesome if you could actually do that, and it would be pretty awesome if it worked. Just completely ignore the laws of physics and just enjoy infinite electricity in magical everything free land, but it obviously does not work that way. And so the fallacy of positive liberty here is that it is confusing the outcome of negative freedom for the concept of freedom itself. Again, going back to the picture in your mind of a plug or a power strip being plugged into itself. Yeah, that's pretty much how it is. And so my conclusion on the topic is this. While the distinction between the two is useful to explain the differences between freedom to do something and the freedom that comes with being given something you desire, a society that tries to focus on positive freedom is a society that has basically chosen to kill the golden goose. Like socialism, positive liberty is one of those ideas that can easily seem like a good thing until you actually research it and seriously think about it and how it works, and find out that it just doesn't work. Anyways, that's all I have to say on the topic. So thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to like, subscribe, tip me on Ko-Fi and all that stuff, or leave a comment for the algorithm. Till next time.